you have probate triggering assets, a will is not enough.
Can you explain to people what probate is?
Probate essentially is the process of transferring assets when somebody passes away to their legal beneficiaries. But it's a legal process.
Man, it's like a whole new perception on wills and trusts. I haven't gotten to this much detail with them, which is why I was interested in talking to you.
Let's say I pass today and my kids are adults. Title company, mom and dad passed, here's their death certificate. Title company, please let us sell the home. Title company's going to say, look, you guys have no rights because mom and dad are still on title.
My understanding is just get your in order before you make it a nightmare for the people that are still alive. But Kern, I want to thank you for hopping on here and for talking to me. You're the first legal professional to hop on this podcast and talk with me. So I don't know if that's good or bad.
Yeah, it might be a good thing. It's a good thing. I don't know if it's a bad thing for me, but we'll see. I guess that the end result will be we'll find
definitely
out.
Good for me. We'll see how it goes for you. But I would like you to introduce yourself for people that are listening that may not know you. Obviously, of course, of what you do, your focus, and then how it relates to our conversation today, if you will.
100%. So my name is Singh. I'm founding partner president of the Singh law firm. Our firm is based out of California. We have headquarters in Fremont, Northern California, in the Silicon Valley, and then also in Los Angeles. And our area of practice is exclusively in estate planning. So setting up a revocable trust, wills, financial powers, healthcare directives, irrevocable trusts, doing estate tax planning, and trying our best to help our clients avoid probate. That's our objective. That's our mission. And that's exactly what we do day in and day out.
Can you explain to people what probate is for anyone that may or may not know?
Probate is something you want to run away from as fast as you can. Probate essentially is the process of transferring assets when somebody passes away to their legal beneficiaries. Okay, but it's a legal process. So hypothetically, let's say you own a piece of property in California, or you have assets outside of real estate. When you combine the value of your bank accounts, it's $184,500. There's a process called probate. And essentially what happens here is that when a person passes and they don't have a trust, they may have a will, but they definitely don't have a trust. Let's say I pass today and those are my facts and my kids are adults. Okay. And they try to go to the bank and say, hey, bank, dad and mom have passed away. Here's their death certificate. Here's, a copy of my birth certificate showing that we're the children. Please release those funds to us. Well, the bank's going to say, look, we're super sorry for your loss, but unfortunately, we as the bank, it's not our responsibility to figure out who mom and dad's children truly are. The bank's going to say it's not our job to figure out who all mom and dad owed money to or who owed money to mom and dad. Those are a lot of unknowns that are outside of our wheelhouse. We're here to protect mom and dad's money. So son, daughter, we're super sorry. But what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to go to court and get the court's permission to figure out what needs to happen. Okay. And they're alluding to go through the probate process. And now what's happened is your children or whoever that adult might be, they're now relegated with having to go to court, file a probate, and deal with the court at that juncture. And we'll describe that process in a second. When we have real estate, same thing. Real estate currently has on title has myself and my wife on the deed. Let's just say hypothetically that's a situation without a trust, and we both pass. Kids go to a title company. They want to sell the home. They say, hey, title company, mom and dad passed. Here's their death certificate. Here's the birth certificate showing that we're the children. Title company, please let us sell the home. Title company's going to say, look, you guys have no rights on the title of this home to sell it because mom and dad are still on title. Right now, they're gone, which means the title of this property is clouded. You need to go to court and get the court's permission to figure out what needs to happen. What they're saying is, look, go to court because if we, as the bank or the title company, do anything, we're going to be responsible to you guys, to other potential beneficiaries. We don't want to be liable for that. So go to court and go through the process now and figure out what needs to happen. So there's a brick wall that these individuals are all going to hit. Now, the probate process in California can take 2 years or longer. And typically it could take a little longer. Right now, we filed a couple of probates in the last couple of months, and we didn't get our first hearing until 9 months later. And that's just the beginning now. So you can imagine how stretched out that's going to end up being ultimately when this is all said and done. Okay. But what happens is you get probate, you go to court. It could take 2 years or longer. There's court costs and attorney's fees, which are set by California statute. They're typically anywhere from 4 to 8% of the fair market value of your estate being probated. So in California, if you live in these big metropolitan cities and you have $1 million home, right off the bat, let's say forget the accounts on $1 million home, it could be $40,000 to $80,000 in fees. let alone if someone starts to come out and say, hey, look, I was owed money, I need to get paid. And now they're interjecting themselves in that court process. They're getting their lawyer, the lawyer on the children's sides or whoever's brought that probate to court are having to litigate. Now that's going to drive your costs up and delay even more. So it just becomes very messy. At the end of the probate process, the decedent's creditors get paid, so they're going to all get dealt with, and then whatever is left over is transferred to the beneficiaries. Now the problem here is that the time and delay, there's expense involved, and then maybe my kids aren't ready to handle the funds at that point. Maybe they're still too young. Maybe I need to have some control factors there. Well, we've lost that ability to control the assets for our potentially immature children. Or maybe we didn't have kids. And maybe we had in our minds a specific way we want our assets distributed. Well, unfortunately, through the probate process, they're going to follow the California intestate succession laws, and it might end up going to people in your family that you didn't intend for your assets to go to. So this is the problem. This is the pain point of probate that we're trying to solve. We're trying to eliminate the probate process to reduce the time, to reduce those costs when it comes to the statutory fees, and also provide you, the decedent, God forbid you pass, the control over how your assets are distributed to your beneficiaries, whoever they may be, children, friends, family. They could go to charities, whatever that looks like for you. We want to make sure that your wishes are honored even when you pass.
For exclusive access to bonus content, new episodes, and more, check out our Patreon account for only $5 a month. Link is in the description. Yeah, my understanding is just get your shit in order before you make it a nightmare for the people that are still alive. that's
100%.
That's always been my understanding. So I appreciate that that amazing explanation. I do want to ask you in a little bit about that specific process of probate, because I find it, boringly interesting, but also I'm trying to scare people into not going to probate so you don't have to, so you can plan properly with someone like you or anyone you may or may already know, of course. But I would go to this guy. But in regards to the reason as to why, how come a will is not sufficient enough? Because I feel like off the bat, like off the cuff, you're like, oh, I have a will. It says go to so and so, but it's not. Your property title is not, or your assets are not in a trust. And also explain a trust for people as well. But how come having a will and explaining so and so will get this and that's not sufficient enough for it to avoid the messiness of the process? Or is it possibly acceptable?
So yeah, it's a great question, David. I think a lot of people have that misconception, and why they think a will is the most important document that we can potentially establish is that we've watched movies, we've read books, we've watched TV, episodes of whatever TV shows, and a will is always this one document that everyone magnifies as really important. And unfortunately, a will is not going to avoid probate court. Okay, so if you have probate triggering assets, a will is not enough. Probate triggering assets are real estate or bank accounts, and your bank accounts, the cumulative value, not just one, but when you add up all of your financial assets, equal or exceed 184,500 in California. So typically when I ask a client, hey, look, do you have real estate? Do you have bank accounts? And they're like, yeah, well, those are your probate triggering assets. You need to set up a trust in order to avoid probate. A will's not going to be enough. A will, what happens if you don't have a trust and you just set up a will, your will is going to identify who you're married to, who your kids are. Your will say, hey, look, if I'm gone, I want my assets to go to my spouse. If my spouse is not there, I want them to go to my kids or these charities. But that's only going to be operational. It's only going to become effective once the probate process is completed. Then it eliminates the intestate succession route, which is the California statutory distribution if you pass without a trust and a will. It just then says, judge, look, don't do California intestate succession. Read the will. The will stated who these assets should go to, but that's going to be at the end. We still have to go through this lengthy process of figuring out who the decedent's beneficiaries are, who did the decedent owe money to, who owed money to the decedent. So that whole kind of admin work through probate needs to occur first before the will gets read and then it's actually executed for purposes of distribution. So a will won't even get us past that first door of probate. You're going to enter probate no matter what. The trust is the document that allows us to do that.
Why though? You know what I mean? Like if it is, am I just looking at it too much from like a New Jersey, what the hell's going on process? Like if a will states XYZ in a legal document with an attorney who is present when the person wrote this out, what is it about a trust that makes it legally more efficient or sufficient in the eyes of the law that we'll kind of distribute everything properly?
Yeah, great question again. So a will is just a document that states your wishes, right? We're not able to control the assets per se while you're alive in that will. So what I mean by this is that your assets, when you have a will, are still titled in your individual name. So David, you have a house, you have bank accounts, and you have a will, and your will says, I want everything to go to Kern Singh, right? Thank you, by the way, David. Okay. But you want everything to go to Kern. Unfortunately, the assets that you have are still titled in your individual name. So when you pass, you still have that same problem. You go to court, or excuse me, you go to the bank, and I'm going to go to the bank with your will and say, hey, Bank of America, David passed. Here's his death certificate. Here's his will that says everything's supposed to come to me. Here's my identification. I got my driver's license. I got my passport. Well, it's not the bank's job to figure out, am I really that Kern who that he was speaking about in the will? It's not the bank's job to figure out if my identification I'm providing them is authentic. They're going to say, look, again, go to court. We'll still honor all this once, get the court's judgment telling us what needs to happen. Now, same thing with the house title, right? But if you flip it over to the other side and you have a trust, and your trust, David, would be this contractual document that spells out everything you think your will should be doing. So it's going to be actually happening out of the trust, but it's a contract. And now you're going to fund the trust when you establish it. And what that means is you have house, you have bank accounts, and those assets have title. The title of those assets will change into the name of the trust. So now if I go look at the title of your real estate, it'll be held in the name of your trust. If I go look at the title of your bank account, it's going to be held in the name of your trust. So this way, if you were to pass, and I'm your trustee for that matter, I'm the one who's going to execute this. I'm going to go to the bank and say, bank, look, David's no more. Here's his death certificate. Here's the trust that says I am the trustee, the successor trustee to execute for David, for his beneficiaries. They now have eliminated the CYA of the court. The CYA is now putting the burden on the trustee to make sure that I do all those functions properly for you without getting the court involved. So that kind of gets us outside of the court process, puts the burden on the trustee to be able to take care of it. We've saved the time, we've saved the expenses as well. But I think a lot of people, David, at this juncture of establishing a trust think it's so easy. Let's go online and find some forms. Let's go work with the cheapest guy out there. But you're not going to get the experience of what you truly need to do. It's not setting up the document. It's actually fundamentally operating that trust the way it needs to operate. It's funding the trust properly. It's not just setting the trust up and not transferring your assets. And imagine, David, you're going to go to Hawaii next week, right? You're going to throw your suitcase on the bed and you're going to put your board shorts, sunscreen, and flip flops in there. And you're going to go to Hawaii. And when you get to Hawaii, you've got your board shorts, your sunscreen, and your flip flops. They're useful. You packed them in. Now imagine you do the same thing. You put your suitcase on your bed the night before you travel, but you just get a list, and on that list you write board shorts, sunscreen, flip flops, and you put that into your suitcase and nothing else. And you go to Hawaii. You've got an empty suitcase in Hawaii. It's useless. So it's the same thing. Your trust is the exact same. You got the trust. It's your suitcase. It's empty right from the get-go. You have to actually fill it up. You have to transfer your assets in. Your assets by title have to be titled in the name of that entity, that suitcase. So God forbid you quote unquote go on that lengthy vacation, which is us passing, and that trust gets handed over to your trustee. They open it up. They actually can stick their hand in there and touch those assets. Their title in that trust. So that's kind of like in a very simple format of it, just to keep it very simple for everyone to really understand how that functions and works. It's not just establishing the trust to avoid probate, but it's also very, very important to fund that trust.
Man, it's like a whole new perception on wills and trust, which I haven't gone into this much detail with them, which is why I was interested in talking to you. Long story short with that, from, again, my New Jersey interpretation, SparkNote version, put your shit in a trust.
Yeah, 100%.
So I know you kind of mentioned it a second ago in regards to it was $184,500, or that's the limit as to what a will work up to. Like what is the purpose of a will at this point? Is it protect? I know you said specifically real estate and certain assets that trigger the trust or trigger the will, one or the other. Why? What is the purpose of a will if a trust will just be all encompassing? Like you just skip the will regarding assets and real estate or any other reasons? Like, or is there a benefit to still having a will?
Great question again, David. So first and foremost, even if a client doesn't have cumulative assets, their financial assets don't equal or exceed $184,500, they might still have real estate, right? That's still important to look at because you'll still have probate that triggers because of that real estate, which will then loop in all your bank accounts, even if they all are less than $184,500. So a will wouldn't even be sufficient under those circumstances. The very limited situations where a will would be useful by itself for an individual or a married couple is if they didn't have significant assets, they didn't own any real estate, they rent, they're probably never going to be able to own a home, and their assets will never combined value ever exceed 184,500. But even in those scenarios, you want to step back and look at the client's facts. They might have kids, young children, and the parents might, the individual setting up the will might actually have life insurance. So if they have life insurance without real estate, without these bank accounts that trigger probate, but they have these young kids and they have this life insurance, or even if they have adult children in life insurance, the issue here is that that life insurance, when they pass, is going to get distributed to people. And when it gets distributed to people, it goes to them. They can spend it however they want. There's no limitations. There's no restrictions. So when you have a young kid, first and foremost, that money is going to be held for them until they get to 18. So it might be useless to them. Let's say mom and dad pass and the kids are still 8 and 10. Well, what are we supposed to do with this money? This money was supposed to provide liquidity to provide for a lifestyle for these kids. Mom and dad are gone. They're not able to pay for the day-to-day expenses. So this cash is supposed to do that. Now it's not. Then the kid gets the money at 18 to go do whatever they want. They're going to go to college and end up blowing through a good chunk of it. So it could become distracting or harmful to the child. Or you might have an adult child who may not be mature enough to handle a significant amount of funds. They might end up blowing it away. They might have drug problems, alcohol problems. So you want to have restrictions. So even in a scenario where a family does not have the assets which would trigger probate, but they might have some life insurance, we still say, hey, look, set up the trust. Because you'll grow into it over time. One, right? You might buy the property, you might get the assets and accounts. So this way you're staying organized from the get-go. It's always good to stay organized. And then secondly, you make the trust the beneficiary of that life insurance. So that God forbid you pass, life insurance gets cut out, a check comes to the trust right away. And now the trustee of that trust can use that money in a controlled fashion for your beneficiary. So if they're young, yeah, kids, continue to do what you're doing, be kids, go to school, we'll be able to pay bills. We got extra liquidity to help kind of carry you guys on. Or if you have adult children and those kids are going sideways, we can control that for the children as well. So again, in those scenarios, it works well. I haven't answered your question. In a scenario where a will would work by itself, it's very limited, and we always encourage people to set up the trust. But when you have the trust, what's the purpose of the will? The purpose of a will when you have a revocable trust is to identify whether you're married, what's your marital status, identify who your children are. And then it identifies, if you do have children under the age of 18, who their guardians are going to be, right? So if we pass and we have young kids, we don't want the court to decide who takes care of them. We don't want them to end up in foster care. We don't want random family members wanting to take care of these kids. So you end up putting those guardianship provisions in the will. The other element of the will then says, for all other purposes, distribution of our assets, please look to the trust. The trust document is the document that's going to distribute assets. Now, remember, probate's public, right? So anyone can go down to the courthouse and figure out what's going on in your estate, who's bickering with who, who's beefing with whom. A will by itself also ends up in probate, and your will becomes a public document as well. So you can go down to the LA courthouse, take a look at all the celebrities' estates who've gone through probate. You've got James Gandolfini, you've got Michael Jackson, and you can read each and every one of those probate things because it's all public. But when you have a trust, there's no court. There's no court involved, right? If you properly fund it, because there's no probate. So it's private. If you wanted to cut out a kid because they were misbehaving, or you wanted to write in certain things that you just didn't want to make public, you want to keep your family things, you want to preserve your family's privacy, you do that through your trust. And that's why it's so important to set up the trust. But the difference between the will and trust is specifically that one avoids probate, the other doesn't. When you have a trust, the purpose of the will is essentially to identify your key players.
Yeah, I think the biggest key point, again, from my standpoint for setting up a trust as it relates to this podcast, is I think when people pass and you lose someone in your life, it usually the bus always, I think, prospectively stops right there, where it talks about the grieving process, the emotional aspect. But part of that grieving and emotional process is with the baggage that were left over later. So in my head, I think, if I a lineage to pass down to, or XYZ, even right now would be my sisters and my mom or my nephews, when I pass, if I don't have my stuff in order, whether it's financially or even just like little things throughout the house, if you want to make it microscopic, it's like you're leaving that with the people that are left grieving. So they're gonna have to clean up what you left behind. So as a person that's still living, to prepare essentially for your death and have these harder conversations, even though it might be scary to set up something for your inevitable death, you're making it easier for the people that you love or the people that you want to leave things after. Because when you pass and you don't have it set up, it's going to be a clusterfuck. Excuse my French, but it makes the process for the people that are grieving you so much harder logistically to handle the rest of your stuff that you have left around. So if anyone's listening and you've experienced loss, you haven't experienced loss, or you have kids and whatever you want to organize for the day you do pass, make it easier for the people that are after. This isn't for you. This is for your people after. So it's a very
Yeah.
unselfish act. You're not taking any of this stuff with you. So it's really important for me to express that, and through someone in the lens of your eyes that actually experiences and handles this stuff. Why does someone not put it in a trust? Is it just not in the forefront of their mind? They don't think about it, not educated? Why do people not set this up earlier than
What
later?
Yeah, what I've realized is it's a combination. There's multiple reasons, and I think the top maybe three or four would be that one, people aren't educated about the subject matter, right? They don't understand. They think that, oh, we'll deal with it either later, right? So one, they're not educated. We'll deal with these things later, or they start to take things into their own hands and add their kids' names to the title of their properties and bank accounts. And we can talk about that in a second, which is a horrible idea. Or they're like, hey, the subject matter of death is just too much for them, depending on culture. That's something that just we just don't talk about, right, culturally. So that could be something. It could be, there's a whole slew of reasons, but at the end of the day, we buy homes in neighborhoods we want to live in, right? There's a purpose, there's a reason. We want it for the school district. We want it for the safety. We buy life insurance because we're going to die one day. We want to make sure that there's enough money left for our children or our spouses. We have a 401k. We're planning for retirement. So if we're all taking these steps that are, yeah, they're important, no doubt, why aren't we taking advantage of something that's guaranteed in life, right? There's nothing else guaranteed in life except our death, right? There's not all of us are going to be Warren Buffett. We're not all of us are going to be Elon Musk, right? We all strive if that's what we are striving for. Those are our goals. But at the end of the day, we're all guaranteed, and this is a common denominator amongst everybody who's living and breathing on earth, is that we're all going to pass. And everywhere in the world, when you pass, there's some form of a system of assets going from us to our kids. Why aren't we bridging that gap? Why aren't, like you said, David, why aren't we making that simpler? Why are we kicking the can down and letting our family deal with it? They're already in an emotional state. They're already sad, right? They're already worrying about that. And now we've thrown the burden of dealing with the real estate, dealing with the bank accounts, dealing with where all the utilities are. If you're not organized, think how disorganized that's going to be for them. And sometimes small projects for these families can take a couple of years to resolve. And now you've put that memory of death in their mind for a couple of years after you've passed. So that closure, even though you think the funeral is going to bring that closure has not come to them yet. They're still dealing with it. So bring that closure a little sooner too. Send off that emotional gift. I say this all the time. The most important asset you have is your family. Screw the money, screw your net worth. It all has to do with your family. And if you're going to put this burden on them, I just don't think you're doing the service for your family.
Yeah, and I wonder I think it is, in tapping into what you just said already, but I think I wonder if it is something that just gets ignored due to lack of education, of course, but also just the avoidance of it. My broker and friend Jamie, who you connected with, she and we spoke about it. She made an interesting point with her culture. She's Chinese. They're very superstitious according to her, and talks about how the culture kind of avoids, not in general. I'm sure there's of course people that have this all set up, but it seems to be a conversation that's avoided. So I wonder, outside of just a specific culture, just people in general, it might be a conversation that's literally just pushed away. Just like this conversation on my podcast and me normalizing the conversation of death, it's something that's just, oh, I don't want to talk about it, this or that. And it's avoided not only for lack of education, but fear in talking about it and confronting a topic of death. And again, with me, I'm like, I mean, I understand the fear aspect, but when it comes to separating the emotional fears and just finances and logistics that are going to make it easy for your family, it seems like a no-brainer to me. So I'm hoping this conversation educates some people that may have already gone through it. I'm sure there's plenty of people that are listening that missed the boat and their parents perhaps didn't set it up, and now they're selling their parents' property, and then it just adds to the stress. So again, it's a future. It's planning for a reason. So if anyone's listening that has gone through, and still, if you have kids or whatnot, it really can apply to everyone. If in my head, if you have a lineage or XYZ, so it's really cool to hear you explain this process and the importance of it. And I do want to ask you a couple questions after this, but do you have any specific stories that stand out to you in regards to people that didn't plan it? I know you said you have a couple probate processes now, but is there anything that just stood out to you that really reflects the importance of handling this based on how a specific family is going through it now?
Yeah, you obviously have, based on our discussions now, hey, look, there's A and B. A is you set it up, you fund your trust properly, you avoid probate. You don't set it up or set it up properly, you end up in probate. That's A and B. That's black and white. But there's also scenarios where families are like, yeah, we know we need to do it, just like we were talking about, but they wait until the last moment. So maybe there's a spouse who's terminally ill, brain tumor, or has some other health issue, and they got a couple of days to live. And we've seen this happen often. The pressure's on, families on the phone. Please take care of of all of this last minute. And we just recently had a family that we dealt with, and one of the parents was essentially on their deathbed, and they're cognizant, they were lucid. I was having a conversation with them. They had a successful business that they were running. They'd made a significant amount of money. They had a significant amount of wealth. They had about 30 separate individual single family homes in Northern California, and the majority of them were paid off. And it was a husband and wife situation where one of the spouses was passing. So there was a surviving spouse, and they were wanting to rush to get all this done literally within a day. And it's not realistic in those scenarios. And the conversation I had to have with the family, right off the bat as an attorney, I'm like, all right, let's pause. Let's figure the facts out, because that's what you're having. I'm not here to really be, I'm obviously going to be emotional and hold your hand, but I also have to be very factual based on the time of the essence issue, right? And so the questions we ask is like, all right, this is an end of life situation, but we still have a surviving spouse. Well, let's ask you these questions. Are all of your assets titled in both husband and wife's name? Because that in and of itself is a little bit of a band-aid in that scenario where the facts where one spouse was on their way out. Because once that spouse passed, and luckily for this family, all of their assets, including all of their bank accounts and all the real estate, were held jointly as community property between husband and wife. And that's not ideal. Obviously, it'd been best if it was in a trust. But what I assured the clients in this scenario is that, look, right now you guys are in actually decent shape. Let's deal with setting up the trust once things settle down. And what that meant is once the spouse who is on their way out passes, because you as a family need to sit together and be with one another and not worry about this. Now that we've resolved, like, hey, there's no immediate issue, focus on your family, focus on the grieving, and then let's get everything set up. Because what this scenario allowed us to do is that when that spouse passed, the surviving spouse was able to establish an individual estate plan for themselves. We were able to transfer those assets into that trust for them, and help them avoid probate on the second spouse's passing. And luckily for this family, there was no estate tax issue, so we were solid there. So that's why we didn't really technically have to do any planning beforehand either. They were below the threshold, but again, that's a significant scenario where, hey, look, we know we need to get it done, but then they just waited too long. And I tell people, look, when's the right time? They ask, when's the right time to get your estate planning done? I was like, while you're alive.
That's it.
Right?
If it wasn't, I mean, it wouldn't be planning. It'd be you'd be screwed. So,
Yeah.
Turner, I really appreciate this. This is again, it clarified a lot of things for me that I knew the gist of it, but it kind of put in perspective different aspects, the importance of planning this. And I think it really blends well with what I've been talking about, like I mentioned, just because this is prepping for your death as opposed to prepping for grief or considering grief. And this is just an important conversation. I haven't had too many financial real estate conversations, or maybe one other financial conversation. So I hope for everyone that's listening, you pulled from this and the thought of how to prepare for your death, because guys, we're all going that way, and you might as well make it easier for the people in your family. But in regards to your business, again, I know you gave us an intro in the front, but I'm going to put all your information as usual for everyone that has listened to the show. I'm going to put Kern's info on the bottom so you can find him. But if there's anything you want to plug in regards to letting people know what you got going on and how they could find you outside of the links I'm going to post, please feel free to use this time to do that and talk about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, David. First and foremost, David, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. Really appreciate it. It was super fun. I enjoy talking to you. The several conversations that we've had so far. I think you're doing a killer job for your community that's listening, as well as your entrepreneurship. I just think it's super creative, and I think you're killing it. So keep that up. I love to see that. As far as our firm goes, we only practice estate planning. And I think that's super important because we're not jacks of all trade. We're masters of one. When you're searching for an estate planning firm, or any lawyer in particular, you want to go to a firm or an individual lawyer who's practicing in that niche area. Like, right, when you have a heart issue, you're going to your cardiologist. You're not going to your general practitioner. You're going to that cardiologist, and that's all they're doing. That cardiologist is not going to mess with your brain. They're not a neurologist. They're not a brain surgeon. They're not an orthopedic surgeon. They're a cardiologist. That's what we are. We're the cardiologists of estate planning. So that's our niche. That's what we've been doing for the last 14 years. You can go check our reviews out on Google. We're literally the highest rated estate planning firm in California. I can say that with utmost confidence. And we're going to continue to be. That's just who we are. That's our mission. That's our culture that we've created. And that's what we want to do, is we want to be able to serve the community. And I think as far as our firm goes, we're growing. We have a NorCal presence. We have a Los Angeles presence. I think next will be Irvine, potentially Texas as well. So we're in that growth phase as well. And but we are here to serve and here to help. And even if you don't choose our firm, I absolutely hope you guys have gleaned information from today's conversation to go out and get it. One, you got educated to a point, but go get educated and go get your estate plan done, whether it's with our firm or not. I think it's just so important for you guys to take that step. The other thing I'm going to caution everyone on is there's a lot of YouTube videos out there that explain, trusts and wills. There's a lot of information on Google when you Google search it, but that's never going to replace an estate planning attorney's advice specific to your facts. A lot of the stuff you're going to find on the internet is going to be completely out of context for you. So be careful with that information. Is definitely something that I'd say.
I appreciate that. There's a lot of BS on the internet that comes off as factual, so I think it even expands beyond just family planning and estate planning. Listen, man, I really
100%.
appreciate it. And guys, thank you for listening to another episode of Dead Talks. Hope you learned something and get your shit in order for your family, all right? Until next time. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Dead Talks. Please do not forget to hit the subscribe button and also the notification bell. That'll give you updates as to when we post a new video, more episodes, and more content in general. We are streaming on all the major podcast platforms, including Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and all that. And also find us on Instagram at Dead Talks Podcast or www.deadtalks.net. Thank you so much.